So the goal of actually making this is sort of twofold. I wanted to create like a course or like a pretty much like a learning module to help beginners or people like looking to get into learning Python and learning all that stuff to get into it. And there's like so much out there that honestly it's overwhelming to learn even just like the basics, right? Or even if you do get past the basics, it's kind of like the whole what now. But I feel like having a specific path that contributes to your particular interest, and I'll explain more about the interest part in a second, is really key to helping someone learn. And also having something like a live stream I think is super key, because like the engaging factor of being involved with it plays a huge role versus just like going through a tutorial or like watching a video or even reading a book, because a lot of those other mediums, they kind of require motivation, and it's kind of like going to the gym by yourself, right? Like you can go to the gym by yourself, and if you don't have anyone to work out with, it's very tough. It applies with everything, dance, same thing when I go like rock climbing. It's just so much better if you have a community or people that you can kind of engage with. That changes a lot about how you learn or how you progress through something. So this is kind of the start. A lot of this is going to be very like, and the reason I'm doing this as a live stream first is because really I don't have things like super well prepared, and by doing a live stream it makes it a lot easier for me to polish things. Like the best way to polish it is to actually like use it, and if I'm gonna like try to, if there are people out there that want to learn, might as well kind of go both ways, right? Let me grab my water real quick, I'll be right back. So I'm gonna post the VODs for this at some point after I get it edited too, so you don't need to like feel like you need to like have everything ready, or like, you know, if I'm going a little bit faster, like don't worry, like I'll make sure to like clip a lot of this stuff out and make it readily available. But again, the engaging part is going to be in the live stream too. So what can you expect from this series? Well, first, I'm calling it an hour code for a reason. We all have busy lives, obviously. I don't want to make it too long. If I make it long, like too long, it might get boring. So the real goal is to be very quick, concise, take it a little bit at a time. You know, I don't want to overwhelm you, and as we progress, we can, you know, improve this. And really, this is all about being a community. So I want you to like learn and also share with people. And talking with you, like specifically, I know a couple other people that were interested, like Bruce, you know, Bruce and like Karen were interested as well. So yeah, people that you like definitely know that you can talk with. Let me open the window up a little bit. We also got Jenny in the chat. Jenny, I know this will be great for you too, because it's used in so many fields, including visual effects. So let's get right into it. So the key thing I want to start off with is learning the basics of programming, right? Like, this is learning the absolute basics. No knowledge, no nothing. I don't expect you to even have type any code or taken any classes or nothing. No, nothing. Like that, nothing. And you know, one of the big things is, I guess, what do you think of when you think of programming? I know when I talked with a few people that are not programmers or kind of look at it from the outside perspective, they, you know, they kind of give me a lot of different answers. You know, some people kind of think it's more in the IT realm when you talk about programming, like, oh, you know, the IT department, right? That's one idea. Another one would be like, oh, people that make video games. That's another one. People that build websites like Facebook, or even like Apple products or that kind of stuff. They kind of gear towards different technical realms, which in all those aspects are actually true. Programming fits into all of those in some way or another. Exactly, embedded codes, HTML, like web stuff, right? Like you think of like, you even might think of some experiences of you doing it. Like for me, when I was younger, you know, I would like look up like little like hacks you can do in games, like overwriting certain scripts in video games. Same thing with a lot of people with MySpace. They would just like change the HTML for their MySpace page, and then they can get like a certain like profile, right? Like who knows MySpace, right? So and actually to a big degree, all that is considered programming, you know? And what's great is programming is such a big realm, and it's involved in so many things that I feel like the skill of understanding how to program or understanding how programmers think fit into so many different realms that it doesn't limit you to what you do for your career, for what you do for fun. It just doesn't limit you in any of those aspects, which is great. If you want to do like art, you can utilize it in art. If you want to use it for more technical things like building really large web apps, building big mobile apps, that kind of stuff, you can do that. Or if you just want to use it for something else, if you have a different career, if you're a doctor or if you have a career in another field, you can utilize that to help you automate some of the processes that you use in those fields, which is great. So we're gonna get a little bit into Python programming, and the question that usually comes up is like, what is Python? You know, you might have heard of it, you might have gotten a glimpse. Oh yeah, definitely hacking. And that's also kind of the fun part too. You can definitely do certain hacky things, or like you can kind of like automate a lot of things, which some people like to kind of think of as hacking too, which is cool. And we'll go through some of that stuff as well. So you know, you might have heard Python, and in some manner, you know, someone might have said, oh yeah, I love Python programming. Or if you talk to people like, oh, where do I learn programming, or how do I learn programming? You know, they might be like, oh, take the Python course, or like learn, you know, go to Code Academy and learn Python. Usually when I talk to a lot of people starting off, they're like, oh yeah, my friends told me about Python and like learning Python. And I feel like that mentality is sort of like the incorrect way to look at Python or programming, right? Python is just a tool. It's just a language that you use to create your end product, whatever that product may be. Similar, you know, you might hear, if you look right here, it says Python is a programming language. And a programming language is similar to just like any language, right? Like if you're going to talk to somebody, whether it be, you know, in English or Spanish or French, you're still just communicating with them one way or other. It's like an English person is not going to understand a French person, but that's fine. Like there's still ways to communicate with people. And programming, it's just a medium for you to interact with your machine, your computer, your mobile device. You know, it's just a way to communicate in between.
Welcome to Call of the Wild.
So let's go into
An exploration of sound with the latest electronic music.
Let's see here. I talked a little bit about Python itself.
These are the songs of the wild.
Wait a second. Oh, no worries about yeah, I know there's like a slight lag, so but just feel free to ask. Like if you have any questions, pop in and just continually ask them. I guess I should kind of also explain the roadmap a little bit on on kind of how we're gonna learn. So there's a few things. First, we're gonna get into just kind of the very, you know, I really want to get to understand what kind of goals you guys have. And I know that sounds very general, but the big thing is like, what do you want to get out of this? Do you want to get out because you want to take computer science in college and you want to become a programmer? Did you want to learn just because some of your friends were making something really cool and something interested in you, like something caught your interest to build something? Or just purely for the fun, you just want to learn, you feel like it's a good skill to have. There's so many different paths, and I kind of want to understand what you guys have and what you guys want to learn overall with not just this, what I'm doing with programming. Like I'm sure all of you guys had like moments where you've like thought about programming and you're like, okay, I want to like learn how to program. So the big thing is understanding like what's motivating you. So one question that people usually ask me, or to the world, I'll see a lot of questions out there on Reddit or on Facebook, it's what learning resource is the best? Like, where do I start? What's the best learning resource? Let's see here. I want to move my dev department at my work. Oh, okay. Nice, yeah. You work at Entrado, right? I saw that they had the dance battle there. Sweet. Yeah, that's a good goal. I'm sure like you've probably like popped by or like you have people that are in that apartment, so that's a really good motivator. I think, hey, Kevin's on board. What's up, Kevin? Create 3D images for augmented reality. Nice. Yeah, AR is a big thing right now in the development world, especially with a lot of the stuff coming out. That helps make it much easier, especially with the new cameras that are like on the iPhones and the Android phones. They're equipped better for augmented reality. So, yeah, of course, dude. Of course. I'm glad you guys are here. Like, I'm really, like, I just decided to start it off, like, right, like, from the get-go, and I just want to get into it because I know trying to perfect it and make it good, you're never gonna get there. So just start it now, and we'll get rolling really soon. But both of your goals are like really good goals, and the reason I say that is because they're not overachieving, right? I've heard some people say like, oh, I want to create the next Facebook and stuff, which I get that's a good goal to have too, like a very ambitious goal, but it's good to start with something small. And in both of your cases, they're not small, right? But you can dissect them into steps that can help you get to that point. In your case, Tonga, you want to move to the dev department, right? So of course you can talk with the manager there and see what requirements there are, so on and so forth. But you know, starting now, you know you're working towards that goal. You're working towards that. And for you, Kevin, obviously you have an idea of AR, and you've probably used some of this stuff. So you have sort of the product that you see in hand. You see what people are creating, and at least taking this like initial step forward will help you get into that realm. And the big thing too is the motivation factor. Like I said, I can't teach like every single bit of this, and of course you're gonna find resources out there. But the goal is to really get you at least get the ball rolling for you guys, and really help you guys understand a little bit more of the realm and how to look up the answers to your questions. So those are the big things. And so I was actually, okay. So the roadmap to creating something useful. We're gonna get up with the initial setup of everything. I'm gonna get the setup done on my machine, which is a Windows machine, but I'll have stuff on like how to set up on Mac or whatever like operating system you use. but like just kind of getting things set up so you guys know how to sort of create your development environment to kind of play around with, because you're going to want to have this as your playground to foster your learning even more. This is going to be how you start interacting, creating things. So the initial setup is really important. I know a lot of people can get stuck, or they can kind of like get to a point where they're just like, oh, I don't know what to do now, and then they just kind of, you know, go to something else. So I want to get that initial setup to the point where you guys can start playing around with things, and you know, you guys would be able to then continue finding other resources online. And that's what I recommend doing too, is not just kind of basing it off one resource, but really look around and find different resources that really suit how you like to learn. I know a lot of people, you know, for me, I try to learn through certain courses, like maybe on Coursera, or you know, some people mention Code Academy, but I've found that I was struggling a lot because while I can go through the motions, I just didn't know where else to go after that, and it just felt like I was just getting lost in some of those. So I needed something that was more engaging and also keeping my interest. So that was a huge thing. Okay. From there, we're gonna go through into the semantics of programming. That's learning the actual language. That's learning grammar. That's learning some of these key buzzwords that you might have heard from certain people. If they throw out stuff like, oh, object-oriented programming, functions, classes, methods, this and that, variables, that kind of stuff. You know, we're gonna go through a lot of those semantics and understand really quickly how to get into that programming mindset. I don't want to go in depth in that, and you'll see a lot of courses that are just like, they go through every little thing of like Python or JavaScript, and to be honest, I don't feel like that's a great way to learn, because you don't have the context of what you're trying to do or what you're trying to accomplish, and learning all the semantics right away, you're just gonna forget it if you don't have anything to apply it to. So I want to go through quickly enough to give you guys a very good, really good groundwork, but applying some of those topics later on into building something. So we're gonna, you know, show a couple of examples, and the reason I selected Python, there's a few reasons. It fits. So one of the big reasons is Python fits in so many different categories of its use. Python can be used to create web apps and be used as like something that creates websites that you see like Airbnb and that kind of stuff by using a technology called Django. So Django is a web framework that allows you to build sort of web things. Aside from that, there's also a lot of different libraries that utilize Python, so you can use it for specific things. If you want for like scientific visualization or artificial intelligence, if you look at Google's AI framework, which one is it called? TensorFlow. You can use Python with TensorFlow, which is an artificial intelligence sort of framework. And I'll get into some of these things later, but just letting you know, it's used in so many different, you know, means that you can kind of fit it into how you want to use it. And another example, I used it in my work, and when I worked at a couple of visual effects studios. So, you know, I worked at a couple of game cinematics and visual effects studios, and we used it constantly to create tools and create certain workflows to building.
Yo guys, this is Conroe here. Hey guys, this is Mern here. Hey, what's up guys? This is San Holo.
TensorFlow? Yes.
Hey guys, this is Alex.
Hey everyone, this is Nathan.
TensorFlow, I will say, is a bit more advanced because it is artificial intelligence, and it's it definitely is a bit more advanced, but you can use this to do machine learning and artificial intelligence, stuff like that. It's really cool. But these are just examples of things that work and have connections with Python. Let me switch my music again. It keeps going into these things, sorry. Okay. So, Python is such a great language to start out with, not just because it has so many use cases, but on top of that, it's also really good and really easy to start off learning if you haven't programmed before. The reason I say that is its syntax and semantics are a little bit easier than you might have heard of something like, say, C++. So C++ is a slightly lower level language that's used for more systems programming or application programming, and while C++ is still a widely used language, it can be more difficult for certain people to understand at least the concepts of programming. So Python is a slightly higher level interpreted language, and I'll go into more of that later, but it's a great language to learn because, in my opinion, it's not like the easiest by far, but it's still the most useful while still being the most easy to understand. So it kind of has that mix of both. It's not a toy programming language, which means like it's not just something that you just use to learn, but it's like you'll never use it in real development. Like Python, people use it all the time in work, in their development workflows, as their job. Like this is a thing. I used it for my job for 4 or 5 years in my work every day, constantly, and I just used it. Like, it's so great. So we'll kind of get into that. So one thing that I really want to emphasize on is the art of failing. And I think this doesn't just apply to Python, or to programming, excuse me. I don't think this just applies to programming. I think this applies really to any skill. When you learn it, you're gonna fail a lot, and you're gonna struggle, and you're gonna have points where you don't understand something and you don't know what to do. And in these cases, it's really just my biggest recommendation is take a minute or take a day and just reflect on that, and you'll get to a point where you will sort of overcome this uphill battle. And this can be something like a specific problem you're having, or this can be your overall project. This is just sort of the programmer's mentality. Hey, thanks for the follow. Is my follow notifications not working? Oh, it should be. It should be. I'll double check that. So I highly encourage you to understand just that you are going to get stuck, which is okay, because you will be able to sort of, if you get stuck, just take a breather. Don't take anything too, don't be too hard on yourself, especially if you don't understand it. And especially if you don't understand it at a pace that you think you should. Just really worry about yourself and really just kind of keep at it. That's all I can say about that. So, things you'll need. Obviously you'll need a computer. Windows or Mac or Linux, if you use Linux. Feel free to use any specific computer that you want. Also, on the weird chance that you don't have a computer, you can get this thing. This is a Raspberry Pi, and it's a $35 computer, so literally no excuses, 35 bucks. This also has Python in it, installed already on it, so you can buy it and connect it to your monitor and a keyboard and a mouse, and you can start using it, and you can actually run Python right away. So yeah, Macs also have Python installed already on it, but we will install a new version, and I'll talk a little bit more about versions in a second. But Macs have it installed. Windows don't have it installed, so you have to install it, but it's super easy to install. I'll go through the installation here with you guys. It's super easy to install. Alright. What else? I do still recommend getting the Raspberry Pi, this thing, especially if you're like a tinkerer, because you can use this for a lot of different things. If you go, I'll link this in the group later, but you can use this for a lot of really cool, nifty things. Like, I've seen people use this for some really interesting things, and you know, computer's already one thing, but like you can use this, since it's so small, you can use this to run with, like, say, like a Python script to do certain things within your house. There's like really cool hacks that people do. They build like little arcade cabinets and they install this in there to run like a little like arcade. There's a lot of really cool stuff. So I still recommend buying it, and also at some point we're gonna use this because this has Minecraft installed, but it also has a very special version of Minecraft that allows you to interact with it through Python. We're gonna use that to kind of interact to show some pretty cool concepts. Yep. So I still recommend getting it. It's 35 bucks too. Like, you'll find a use for it, trust me. Especially if you like tinkering around. Like, if you like tinkering around and that kind of stuff, and playing around with like that kind of stuff, I think you'll find that useful. Alright, so without further ado, we can get started on just like getting it installed and kind of showing what's going on. So I'm gonna do this on Windows. I'll show some stuff later on like a Mac, but I'm pretty sure you guys mostly have Windows, so I'm just gonna show you on a Windows. So this is the official Python website. You're gonna go to this quite a bit if you're gonna learn Python, not only because you can download the Python on here, but there's also documentation on here too. So if you ever do get stuck and you're trying to go through certain things and you need to read up on some of the Python stuff, they have a lot of documentation on here. Right now we're just gonna install it. However, when I go to this download, you'll notice that there's two buttons when I try to download for Windows. Python 3.6.4 and then Python 2.7.14. There's two specific differences, or two different versions, excuse me, of Python right now. Python, you'll hear this especially amongst like Python people, but you'll hear Python 3 or Python 2. To kind of just like sum everything up, it's not that different. Just think of it as like different versions of software, and you would imagine that the 3 is the one you would want to use. Some people still use the version 2 because there's specific bigger applications that they're using that require that. Like, I had to use Python 2 for a while. For learning, we'll just stick with Python 3.6.4. So when you run the installation, I'm just going to install this on the desktop. Wait, stop. Okay. So we're just gonna install this on the desktop, or download the executable. Let me uninstall this and then I'll reinstall it just to show you guys. But to install it, it's just like installing any other program you've installed. You're gonna get an executable or .exe file. You just run it and it will install. Like, super simple. There are some things that you'll see in a second that is a little bit different, but this is like, you know, pretty kosher, pretty easy. This won't be the only tool either. I'll show you some other stuff that you will want. So we've uninstalled it. I'm just gonna reinstall and show you the process. Again, super simple. Just run install now. In my case, I also want to add Python 3.6 to the path down here. Just make sure you have that checked when you install it. It's pretty useful to have that. I'll explain later what that actually means, but just know that it's pretty useful to have that installed to the path too. So once we get this installed, I can show you a little bit more about how we're actually going to start learning.
Here with you now, not coming down, leave my insanity up here in the clouds. Look what we
Okay, so setup was successful and close. So you'll kind of know like how do you know if this is installed on your machine? We can start off by actually checking within the command terminal. So if you've ever used like a Windows PC, you might have gone into, if you type CMD into the search, you'll notice that it pops up the command prompt. If you've ever used this before, this is basically just like your gateway to your internal workings for your computer. Like you can type commands in here and it performs actions in your computer. So if you run that, it's gonna pop up with a command prompt. That's not what I wanted. I forgot the command prompt does some weird stuff. So to test to see if you have Python installed, all you gotta do is in this command prompt, just type Python. And if you type Python and it pops up with this sort of like header right here that says Python 3.6.4, and then it has this kind of like little command arrows here waiting for you to basically type something in, you'll know that you have Python installed, or you have at least the latest version installed. If you type it and it doesn't pop up here, you probably didn't get it installed. Just throwing that out there. So the other reason we're using Python is an interpreted language. And what that means is, you know what I want to do? I want to I want to make a Google Doc real quick. Or a Google slide. We'll do a Google slide because that's better. Because it's hard to kind of explain some of my concepts without this. Let's make a little Google slide, shall we? Okay. We'll just do this. Okay. So oh, yeah. Good question. So what if I already have 2.7.14 installed? I have 3 versions. That's the other thing about Python is you can have multiple versions installed. If you ran through this, another thing you can try typing is Python 3 with a 3 right after it, which in my case it's not going to pop up. In some cases, if you try installing multiple versions, it'll have like 2 separate paths. Give that a try and see if that works for you. Another note, I'm not really used to Windows, I'm more used to Mac, so again, because there are 2 versions, they've kind of made 2 different, you know, and again, you shouldn't just like uninstall the other one, because sometimes you can use both. And I didn't really go too much into the differences between the 2, but there are a good amount of differences, but for learning purposes, it's not going to be too big of a deal. Like I said, the biggest thing is that there's certain frameworks that are out there that still don't use Python 3 yet, And if you know that's the case, usually most Python developers stick with Python 2.7. But again, the differences are just super minor. It's very minimal. They're not gonna like hinder your learning, I should say. Like if you just started learning Python 2.7, or like the thing you're taking is like Python 2.7, like don't think that's like, oh, that's an outdated one, I'm not gonna learn that, right? So don't worry about that too much. I wish I could make this font like bigger, but I can't because Command Prompt sucks. Okay. Yeah, so if you already had Python 2.7 from like another install, type Python 3 and it should take you to the correct one. And you'll know by this header up here that it'll tell you which version that you're running. So, interpreted language. So Python is an interpreted language. What does that mean? Pretty much, an interpreted language is something that doesn't require you to compile the code to create your end result or your end product. And what I mean by that is, if we were programming in, say, C++, usually what you would have to do is you would have to program it, and you would have to do a step known as compilation, which is pretty much converting the code into computer code to actually process and create your end program or your end application. With Python, it actually is, it's an interpreted language. A similar language is JavaScript. JavaScript is also interpreted, which is why JavaScript is so heavily used on the web. Because when you go to a website, you're not like compiling a program to pop up into your Chrome like Facebook, right? It just pops up. And what's great about interpreted languages is I can go in, type Python, and I'm in this Python interpreter, meaning I can type Python commands in here and it will work instantly. I get the results back instantly. So just think this way. Compile. Why am I typing anything wrong? Okay. Can be execute. That's the right word I'm looking for. Directly. So that's one of the other big key differences with Python versus, say, like C++. I don't want to get too deep into that kind of stuff because it doesn't really affect you as a learner, and it's something you just don't really need to know until, like, you know, you start delving more into programming itself as a concept. But having at least a broad understanding is good. Okay. So one other thing that we're gonna want to install is a code editor. So you'll notice that, like, I can type commands in here, but in the long run we're gonna be actually creating code that we're gonna save, right? Meaning I can type 1 + 1 in here and it's gonna pop out 2. Cool. But what if I want to save that? If I exit out of here and get back in, I gotta, you know, type 1 + 1 again. So it just doesn't make sense to type commands in here unless I want to save it, right? So we're gonna need a code editor. So there's a few code editors out there. A code editor, again, it's pretty much just like a text editor, but with extra features, I like to say. A lot of extra features. So in theory, if I wanted to, I could use something like Notepad to type Python code, right? I don't want to do that, Like that's just not a good thing to do. The big reasons why you wouldn't want to just use, say, Notepad is because a lot of code editors have very specific coloring to help you understand the language or to help you understand what you're typing in the context of things. A Notepad, I can type whatever, right? Like I type whatever, and Notepad doesn't know what I'm typing, it just knows that there's just stuff coming in here. So that's just one of the big reasons. So Notepad's a huge no-no. Notepad, can use it, but don't, right? The ones I do recommend, there's a couple. There's one called the Atom Editor, and I'll go to their website so you can see it. Atom Editor. So if you go to atom.io, this is a hackable text editor. This one was built by a company called GitHub. You might have heard of them. So I would recommend, this is a pretty good one. There's another one called Sublime Text Editor. And this isn't, again, this isn't specific to Python. This is just mainly for code. So you can use this for JavaScript, you can use this for C++, you can use this for whatever, right? So Sublime Text is another great one. Another one I would recommend is Visual Studio Code, which is Microsoft's version. So, again, if you look at the images, you'll notice that they're kind of colored in a specific way, and that's to help you understand the semantics of the code, right? You'll know which things are variables, you know which things are functions, or like what you're doing. So I recommend getting one of these code editors. You can get all of them if you want, they're all free, so like, you know, if you want to download more code editors, like, feel free, right? And if you want to try them and just see which one you kind of prefer, by all means, go ahead and do that. I'm going to download Visual Studio Code, just because I've used the other ones and I kind of want to try a different one out too. And I think Visual Studio Code has its own terminal too, which might be useful for us in the scheme of things. So this is the only other like major thing we need to download to get started with Python. That's pretty much it. What have we been live for so far? Been at it for 50 minutes? Wow. 50 minutes already, Jesus. A long time. Alright. Is it downloaded yet? This thing not finishing up. Oh, there we go. So we'll just run through the typical installation process. Here we go. And the reason I wanted to get all this installation stuff on here is, I just want to go through this just kind of from the ground up. Because we'll be able to continue doing this in the future, and like, you know, it just makes sense to have everything kind of on stream so you guys can either follow along or we can use this later. Alright, so when we're finished we can just launch it. And sweet. It's installed. Sweet, it has its own PowerShell. So now, I'll show you sort of the difference you can see on using a text editor versus not, right? So if I call this test, and if I save it as a Python type, so if I go down and I see Python, and I save it as a Python type, and I save it, so what's great about a lot of these code editors is that they allow you to install extensions on them. Okay, so the great thing about these extensions is that any developer can create extensions for these editors. Like, they give you the tools to create extensions, which means if there's like a new programming language that comes out, you can create something that allows the editor to recognize that specific programming language. So in this case, I want to install the Python, this Python extension. So in Visual Studio, you just saw that it said, hey, you know, you should get this extension, so go ahead and install it. There we go. And if you notice in here, there's let's disable linting, close, and close. Okay. You'll notice that they have like a marketplace that allows you to kind of view different things. So for example, I can type JavaScript in here, and you'll notice there's a whole bunch of stuff for JavaScript. This can be, again, very specific, like how you view the code in here, how it looks. It could even be other things too, like specific libraries. We'll get more into that later, so don't worry about that yet. Okay. So the key difference, I'm gonna type a very simple line of Python on Visual Studio here, and if we go back to our notepad, right, and I'll save this out too. Actually, I just won't save it out. This gives a good enough explanation. Ugh, I need to make it bigger. This, do they really not have like a, oh, there we go. So you're gonna notice that one is just in all black. This one right here is in all black. But in this one, you'll notice that not only is there color differences, but I can hover over this print and it gives me actual data about what this print does. Because it has this contextual know-how of Python, it's able to give me sort of like coding help, as well as color code it in a specific way that once you understand sort of the semantics, will help you make sure that you don't make certain mistakes, or you know what you're doing is correct. So already, like, Notepad is a big no-no. Get one of the code editors I mentioned, and that's it. Okay, so I'm gonna use the Visual Studio Code to kind of explain things through here in the PowerShell. However, hey, Clark.io, thanks for the follow, bro. I really appreciate it. So you guys can go in here into the command prompt and follow along with me if you want. The reason I'm not is I can't like zoom in to make it more visible on the screen, whereas on here I can zoom in much more. So I am drinking. It's actually a really good beer. It's a Salisbury from a brewery in LA called Angel City. But it's an ale. It's a Salisbury ale. It's super good. It sounds like super like fruity and kind of like gooberish, but it's actually not. It's kind of like a sour ale in a way, but not too sour. Yeah, it's from this brewery in LA, Angel City. It's really awesome. Really, really awesome. Thanks for the follow though. Again, I appreciate it. Yeah, I like sours. I love sours and stouts. The one beer that like I still have like a little bit of a hard time drinking like consistently is just like IPAs. I like IPAs, it's just like I can only drink them so often. So yeah, if you want to follow along in this command prompt, like feel free, like how I mentioned, typing Python in, you can go in here. But we'll do it in here because I can actually zoom in. And if I type Python in here, you'll notice it works the same exact way. Can I zoom in more? Okay, I can zoom in more. Perfect. Perfect. Okay, so now that we've got a lot of the setup out of the picture, we can actually go in and start like typing stuff. Hey! Thanks for the host, man. Very much appreciate it. So this is, from here is basically just a very quick introduction to Python. So you'll notice that now I'm in the Python interpreter, and this is the other term we'll call it, right? So here we go. So I'll make a new thing. So we're gonna call it a Python interpreter, which basically just means if I type code, it'll run that code for me. That's pretty much all there is to kind of talk about that. You'll know that you're in the Python interpreter if you see these 3 marks. So if you see these 3 marks are in the Python interpreter. Yeah. Sweet. So we'll take the code. I guess this is kind of like the like coders, like the beginning of everything for coding is this statement. You'll see this almost in any like tutorial or course or whatever. So I'll go more into detail about this in a second, but I'm just gonna run it. So if I type enter, you'll notice that the line below is now gives me hello world. So pretty much what I just did was I typed a very specific function called print. Now all print does is it takes whatever value you provide it inside of the parentheses and prints it back out to your command line. We'll be using this quite a bit because it will help us understand kind of the data that we're looking at. And one thing to know about programming is a huge portion of programming is you're given some type of input and you're gonna run something, you're gonna essentially manipulate that data in some fashion and you're gonna give back some sort of output. Very general term, I know, but if you think about a lot of programs or a lot of applications that you may use, that's sort of the general idea. You give it some sort of input, whether it be a website, you might click on a very specific link, right? That is your input. That's the input to the website. The website itself now needs to take that input, understand what you just did, and perform some action based on what that input is. So in the case of, say, clicking a link, it's gonna be like, oh, you clicked this specific link. Let me go ahead and redirect you to whatever link you expect to get out of that. Super general idea, but it's very important to understand that, especially if you've never programmed before. Just throwing that there. So we'll go more in detail with functions in a little bit later, but just know that this print right here itself is a function. Just giving a quick general overview, a function is pretty much something that just takes, it can take data or doesn't need to take data, and it does something. It performs some type of function. I'm not going to go too deep into that yet because we're not at that point yet. I just wanted to just kind of break down this line of code for you guys. So you'll look right here, print itself is the function. Hello world is our input. So we're providing it an input, and the output is, albeit a very simple output, it's printing back what we just did. So I can do the same thing of, hey, my name is Monk, and it does the same thing. So consistent there. Now let's get into a little bit with this interpreter. Before you saw me do something like 1 + 1. You can use this interpreter as a simple calculator, right? So I can type like a couple random numbers, multiply it, and get the right output. That is one of the functions that you can use it. Obviously, we're not going to use it just as a calculator, but you'll see that this interpreter is giving me direct output as I'm typing these values in. So when I type 1 + 1, it's giving me the output of 2. So it's giving me these direct outputs. Now we can get a little bit into sort of the data types of Python and understanding just kind of the general idea of some of the data that we can manipulate and that we can utilize. So you'll notice that I had this hello world in quotation marks. This is known as a string. So you might have heard a string before, but if not, now you know. A string is pretty much just a set of characters, and we denote this with the quotation marks. And you'll notice that this print, if I hover over it in here, takes some sort of value that pretty much can be any value, but in our case we're passing it a string value. So I can use that print again and just type any random set of characters and get that same set of characters back. Another function that we can use right now is a function called type. So if I type and in it I pass hello world one more time, you'll notice that now I'm not getting back hello world as my output. I'm getting this back, class str. Now what this type does is it's taking my input and it's telling me what data type this is, and in this case str stands for string. So string is one of the most commonly used sort of data types. Well, I shouldn't say it's most commonly used, but it's one of the primitive data types in Python. Primitive meaning just kind of like the core data types. So let's go back to our here. So we have string. An example is hello world. Now, you might ask, what would one of the uses be for a string? Well, there's tons, right? Like reading any sort of text on a website or in your mobile app, any sort of description or text, that is a string. Sentences, descriptions, names, anything, all those things are strings. So so you can see why string is such a core data type, right? It's, you know, it encapsulates like a set of characters which can be used for so many different things. And on the computer, typing in chat is a set of strings. Like that sentence that you type out in chat, your username is a string. All those things are strings. Like they're strings. It's just a piece of data that to us represents a sentence, a username, one of those things, but in the computer is represented obviously through a different means, right? once it reaches down to the core level of computer, obviously it's binary, so it's just a bunch of zeros and ones, so it just converts it. So that is one of the core data types. You'll notice that another, actually I'll stick on strings real quick, because another way we can represent strings is not just with double quotes, but with single quotes. So I can type hello world with single quotes, and I still get the same output. So we can go back in here. Now this is a very semantic thing about Python. So just understand that this is more of a language specific feature for Python that you can use either double quotes or single quotes. So I'm just throwing that out there to you guys. And before I do, should I kind of go into that? Oh, we can continue on this. Okay, so that's one core data type. Another one is, you notice that above I was using Python as like a calculator. If I do type, say just the number 1, you'll notice that I get a different value back for my class or my data type. This int. Int stands for integer, which is just a whole number. And again, I can't really like explain how this is just extremely useful, but obviously you can tell just having numbers in a programming language is extremely useful. So I'm just gonna say 1 or 234 or just a random number. So you'll notice I can type a bigger number and it's still an int, right? So that is another core data type within Python. And another example of a core data type is, what about like more precise numbers, right? Like pi, for instance, 3.1415 something, I don't know pi. But if I just type this, you'll notice I don't get int, I get a float. So a float is a more precise value. And obviously the usefulness, to have a more precise number, I think you can understand the usefulness of that. But 1419? Is it one? It's not 15, right? It was 19. I don't remember. But yeah. So those are some examples of some core data types that are within Python. I don't want to go into, there's a lot more data types that besides the ones I just did, but I'll go more into detail with those later. The only other one I want to quickly go over is another important one, which is the concept of like true and false. So if you think about computers at a core, like just if you break it down to the lowest level of just binary, if you think about binary is either a 1 or a 0, right? On or off, yes or no, right? True or false. That itself is another core concept, which if I say type true, and notice that in this case, I'm not wrapping that true in a quotation marks. Whoops. I should actually make sure I capitalize it. So actually this is a good time to talk about this too. So in this case, I got back an error. So if you look back here, it says traceback, most recent call, true is not defined. So you'll notice that it says the name true is not defined. This is a an exception that popped up in Python. We'll kind of go over that in a little bit. What up, Daniel? How's it going? Because Python is awesome. I don't know why you wouldn't like Python. Python is pretty sweet, dude. So if you look here and I type true with a capital T, I'll get a class bool back. This is bool is short for boolean, which simply is true or false. Now I can do the same thing and type false, and I get the same value back. So I'll go more into this exception in a little bit, because it's going to go into our next topic, which is actually good. So if you look right here, it says name error, name true is not defined. That's because in Python right now, there is no reserved word for an underscore true. And in programming, most of our stuff, at least in Python, is caps matter. I should say that. Caps matter. So whether you type true with a capital T, true with a lowercase, it matters in this case. Like, I can't type like that, right? It doesn't work. I have to use lowercase type. So capitalization in Python matters. That's another key point. So the one thing I want to discuss is we'll go into the concept 8 of variables. That's another really key important concept. So you might have heard this before, in just if you've heard people talk about programming. So I want to talk a little bit about the concept of variables. So we've kind of gone through, and if you look at all these, I've done some action on these, or if I'm typing like 1 + 1, right, I get 2 back, but it's not being saved anywhere. And in most cases, you probably want to have it saved somewhere so you can do something with it later. This is pretty much the core of variables in general, I guess. So to define a variable, I can just say, I can type the name of what I want my variable to be. In this case, I can say test equals 1 + 1. So if you notice that once I type that in, it didn't print 2 back out. That's because this value is now being stored within this variable. So it's this is kind of also a little bit tricky to understand sometimes, and especially in Python, because some people might say like, so you're saying, you know, test is 2 now, right? And in this case, if I just type test now and hit enter, you'll see I get this 2 back. So now test has my value 2. If I do test + 1, I get 3. So you'll see that test is now being interpreted by Python as the value above here, which is 2. However, I will say this. I don't want you to think that test is now just 2. So rather than think that, let's make a new slide. Oh my goodness. Okay. So do not think is 2, right? I don't want you to think as this test word is 2. Instead, think of test as pointing to the value 2. Now that's a very key discerning factor, and I'll explain why. So by creating this test, by saying test equals 1 + 1, see, this is also why I didn't want to go into C++, dude, because it can get confusing. So by saying test equals 1 + 1, I am now reserving a word test in Python. So now Python knows of this word test, right? To kind of go back, if I exit out of this and go back in, right, and I type test now, Python's not going to know what that is because I've exited out of the context. It's no longer saved. It's gone, right? But by saying test equals a value and typing it in, I've now reserved a specific word test in this local space for it to be 2. But remember, I said, don't think of test as being 2. Think of test as pointing to 2. I want you to now think of this, the value test, as pointing to 2. By creating this equals, I created an association between test and 2. And the reason I say pointing, what's the difference, right? Say I go back in here and I now say test is now the string hello world, right? What's test now? Test is not 2 anymore. If I type test in, it's hello world. Okay? So what I did just barely is now test is pointing to hello world. This is a very, very key thing and something that can confuse people, especially at the beginning. But I want that to just ingrain into you sort of what's happening. So by saying that this equals, like test equals this value, I'm assigning this key. I'm basically telling Python, hey, I have a new variable for you, test, and it points to this value. That's a very, very, very important thing. This is also specific to Python and some other languages, but it's a programming language thing. But this is the concept of variables. Variables are very, very important because it allows us to save specific states or save very specific pieces of data to be calculated, to be used, to be outputted. Say for instance, you're logging in on a website or you're logging in to something and you type in your username and your password, right? Generally in programming, you know, if I type my username, you store that. I'm storing my username in a variable. In this case, it's called username. That will then be used for, you know, authentication if you're logging into a specific website, or I guess even an example for like Twitch chat, right? If you're typing a message, you're storing that message as a string and then you're outputting it out. So one of the key like foundational blocks of programming is this concept of variables. You're creating these variables that can be saved to, you know, be utilized. Also, same way, I can use our previous print command that we had, and if I type in username and I print it, I get back that value that I'm being used. So I could store that data. Another thing I can do is I can check the type of this. So I can say type username, and I get the same, I get that this is a string. I hope this is sort of kind of making sense. I know like I might be glazing a lot of things over. I'm still trying to get into the habit of like, you know, condensing the information in the right format. But yeah, we've gone through a couple of really strong points in programming so far. We've gone through 2 useful commands in Python already, which is print and type. We've also gone through seeing that Python can be used as a We've also gone through just the very core data types that's used in Python. These things are foundational to how you will work in Python, not just in Python, in programming also. This isn't just a Python thing. Strings, integers, booleans, floats, they exist in every other programming language. This is just this is a core programming concept that you'll utilize, and that's the nice thing is I'm not just like teaching about Python. Like, this stuff is used in all of the programming world. It's used with Swift in building mobile apps. It's used with JavaScript in building web stuff. It's built with C++ in building applications and core operating systems. Like, it's a pretty like strong, like, this is a core concept. The reason I want to glaze over it and I don't want to go like in depth with every little thing again is you see this stuff and it's still like, what I don't understand, you know, like, it still might be like, well, what's the point, right? And that's why I just want to glaze over it, and I don't want to go through like every core aspect of it right away. Yeah, of course. Is there any questions that you might have, Kevin, so far? Feel free to try other things in this Python interpreter too. Don't just do what I'm doing. Feel free to like try different calculations and stuff too, and take a look. Yes, another thing we're gonna go through in a later session is specific grammar for Python. Because right now, so far, what we've done is we've just been typing commands into the interpreter. We haven't actually gone through specific grammar, and we'll go through that. So let's do a recap real quick of what we've kind of gone through. A lot of our time obviously was spent installing Python, getting set up with the text, with a code editor, and playing around with the interpreter. And to be honest, this interpreter, this isn't a trivial thing. This isn't like a thing that only beginners use. This interpreter is used like by everybody. Like, this is how you test things out. This is how you play around with things and see the output of it. I know we didn't get too much into like the language quite yet, just because of all the like setup and installation and stuff like that. We will definitely go into this more in depth. I'm thinking of setting up an hour of code session Tuesdays and Thursdays in the evening time, if this works for everybody. I started at what, like 5-ish or 5 Pacific, so 6 Mountain, 5 Pacific, 6 Mountain time. We're gonna get into more stuff, and the stuff that I actually want to get into a little bit is we'll get more into we'll do a recap on variables. We'll start talking about functions and how those are used. We will also start using Python not just as a command prompt like this, but also creating real scripts up here in the code editor, saving out specific Python files that we can use as scripts. And then we will discuss, what I want to do is we'll create a couple of very simple examples. So we'll do like a coin flipping example, and we'll make a very like basic example of creating a Python script that plays blackjack, or that we can play blackjack on. So we would basically play like blackjack using this Python script. So I'll create a very basic setup of that and show you kind of how that would work. In the future, I want to go through and discuss more about some of the inner workings of Python. Also, in the future, we will go through and look at 2 specific things, mainly bokeh, which will create charts. We will use this to create our own charts, and then also Coin API, which is an API for cryptocurrency. So we won't do anything specific with cryptocurrency, but I like the idea of cryptocurrency as data. So we would use that as data to run in, and we can create graphs with like histograms and like creating just kind of showing data that's flowing through from coin. This is going to be way later because this explains a lot of stuff with using APIs. It's going to involve installation of Python packages. There's a lot of stuff we would have to go through before we get to this point. But I want to get to that sooner rather than later, mainly to get you start working with stuff. So I want to get to that point just so you guys can see how things are starting to get used in context. Because I really am against just like super basic like toy examples. Like I just don't think, I think it's good to see how certain things are done in real context. Yeah. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff we're gonna have to go through before we get to that point though, for sure. There's a lot of stuff. But yeah, definitely make sure you turn on notifications if you haven't, to know when I do go live. But I'll post in the Facebook group about that. I'll also clip the video as needed, and then we'll go and like go more in depth with that stuff. I'll clip it so that you have like references too. Also, I want more chill music than this. I only picked this music because I have license to use it on stream without getting muted, so. And I needed some type of background music. But yeah, I went definitely way over the hour. I apologize for that. There was a lot of setup. This is the first stream too, so I'm glad that you guys came to check it out. We will be having many more streams about this later on. But yeah, I'm going to switch to playing video games because, you know, I don't know why you're hating on Python. Dude, Python is amazing. I've used Python for 5 years in work, and it is amazing.
Popping in on Twitter using hashtag COTW185. Let's see who we got. Alright, James from England saying this family's changed his life for the better, of course.
I love like almost every language in some way, except for certain ones. Like I like C. I like C. I like C++. I like Python. I have preferences. I like Perl. Yeah, I mean, I like most things. Like, I love Python. I love Swift. I actually started learning more about Dart, and I like Dart a lot. JavaScript. Despite some things that I don't like about JavaScript, I think it's a good language. I mean, it's the most popular language for a reason. I even like Perl. I used to use Perl too. I like Perl. There are certain ones that, like, I mean, if I just don't like. But yeah, I'm gonna switch over to video games. Thank you for following this. We're gonna do more. We're gonna go more in depth. This is just the first one, and I don't want to like overburden. So I want to keep it short and sweet. So, you know, hour less would be great. But I will like clip things out as needed for sure.